Hey everyone, and welcome to For the Love of Product, brought to you by the Product-Led Alliance. I'll be your host, Naomi Hanson-Drury, Chief Product Officer at Mina Technologies and all-around passionate product aficionado. Each episode, we'll be looking at the head and the heart behind product-led growth, the passion and the practice of product. And we'll be picking the brains of seasoned CPOs and heads of products, as well as visionary founders and investors getting their inside stories. Enjoy! Hello, and welcome to another episode of For the Love of Product. I am thrilled to have with us today Naomi Gleit. And Naomi, you are zooming in, I believe, from New York today. Is that correct?
Yes, from the West Village.
Lovely, lovely. And for those of you who don't know her name, Naomi is the head of product at Meta and is responsible for leading a lot of work across several teams, all in support of foundational products that cross all the different Meta apps. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. And we're going to start, though, with saying thanks and welcome to the show, Naomi. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Truly, I am so glad we connected on LinkedIn and now we're here.
I'm very glad too. And for those of you who are curious about that, I actually saw Naomi speaking at a Women in Product event and thought she was really powerful and that her message would find a lot of excited ears in our listeners group. So we're excited to have her here today and talking to our audience.
Awesome.
All right. So Naomi, let's first start with, what do we mean when we say you are working on foundational products that go across the different Meta apps?
It's a great question because when I joined, there was only one product. It was www.thefacebook.com. Over time, our products and services have obviously expanded. We have Facebook, we have Instagram, Messenger, WhatsApp, and obviously we have a lot of investments in reality labs around augmented and virtual reality. And instead of reinventing the wheel every single time to build systems around growth, safety and security, social impact tools, monetization services, we try to centralize those solutions or foundations in an org like mine so that we can help all of these apps and devices instead of having them start from the beginning, start from scratch each time. So a great example is we are working on charitable giving tools that we built in Facebook. It would be great if you could donate to charities on Instagram as well. And so we would build that product and have it be supported by Facebook and Instagram.
Makes perfect sense. I'm curious about when that kind of architectural choice came about. Obviously, as you said, you started out as a website. Most of us understand that website, although maybe the younger ones only know it as an app these days. But when did you guys decide, hey, we're going to build for infrastructure, right, across these different apps and these different brands? Was that something that came later in the acquisition and growth strategy, or was it pretty intentional from the beginning?
I would say it came later in the acquisition post acquisition. We were all building on Facebook. The whole company worked at Facebook. With the acquisition of Instagram, there were only 13 people working at Instagram when we acquired it. I think that was 2008. And they had a lot of the same challenges that we had in building Facebook. You mentioned infrastructure. Great point. With 13 people, they were not able to support the infrastructure required for the user base, which was rapidly growing. And so we realized, hey, this is a great thing that we can help Instagram with. If we are building an advertising system that works on Facebook, how can we serve the best personalized ads on Instagram as well? And so I would say as the portfolio expanded, we realized that we could get a lot of economies of scale and best-in-class expertise by having these central teams. So if you think about the apps maybe as verticals, I would think about the teams that I work on as horizontals that work across the verticals.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, so Naomi, your LinkedIn is like one of my favorites. I feel like so many profiles, it's like 1,000, and I'm even guilty of this, 1,000 different job descriptions and roles and stops along the way. And you are just like, I'm here, I'm me, I'm clear. I've been at Facebook. I've been here for 17 years, right? And it's just simple. I want to know behind that. Take me back. Like, what's the story? Give me a little bit about what's not on the front cover there.
Well, I think my past self would never have imagined that my future self would be where I am today, for sure. I kind of fell into it, but at the same time, I had a lot of conviction about it. I went to Stanford. I studied science, technology, and society. It was a totally new major at that time. There was similar programs at other colleges. At Harvard, it was called History of Science. It's more of an anthropology or sociology of how technology evolves, how it changes the way people interact. How did the printing press, impact how communication works? And I'm sure you'd be super interested in this too. That's just something I found incredibly fascinating. At that time, 2005, Facebook had just come to Stanford campus. This is like really dating myself, but Facebook was really only like a very small website that only a few colleges had. And I know it's hard to imagine now that there's 3 billion people who use our services. Back in the day, it was only a couple colleges. And so I was one of the first people to use it. And I was really interested in it as both like a college student. It was basically the digital version of the physical Facebook. They used to pass out a booklet, a pamphlet with all of the photos of the people in your year. Do you remember this? I don't know. Okay, exactly. So all that the website was a name and a profile picture. But people were like obsessed with it, including myself. And I was also obsessed with it from an academic perspective. I just had a conviction that this is going to be really important. At that time, there was something called Club Nexus, which was sort of like an early Facebook that was specific to Stanford. And my thesis was evaluating why I thought Club Nexus would not be successful and why I thought Facebook would be successful. And that was not a given. I think at that time, if you remember, there was like MySpace, Friendster. It just wasn't clear that this whole social media or social networking thing was really going to take off. And when I through the process of writing that, I wanted to work there when I graduated. I actually got an offer from LinkedIn and Facebook, and I chose Facebook. And I guess sort of the rest is history. Cheryl has this saying, if you're getting on a rocket ship, don't ask what seat. And here we are 17 years later. And a lot of people are often like, what have I been doing for 17 years? I feel like I've had so many different jobs in that time, and I'm happy to talk about all of those different experiences. But it's definitely been a wild rocket ship.
I love it. And I think we definitely should go into some of those points. I mean, we'll want to hear some high points, but I also think it's really interesting to hear some of the low points. And, one of the ones that you and I talked about when kind of prepping was your guys' experimentation and entry into mobile. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that was like and where that was in your journey.
Absolutely. And to your point, there has definitely been a lot of low points and a lot of high points. And I think in general, what I have learned is you are never sort of as bad as it seems, and you're never as good as they seem either. And so I've tried to modulate a little bit, not over rotate in either direction. I was actually just telling a team yesterday, because I think things are tough, now as well, that when we first launched Newsfeed, there was such a revolt and backlash of people using the site at that time that we had to put security guards to guard the office because there was protesters outside. It's funny now, but I think at the time, it's just, there have been a lot of lows is what I'm saying. This is not the first hard thing that we've had to do. One of the other hard times was the shift to mobile. And I think it's really well documented that we were pretty late on that. We were really focused on web development. www.thefacebook.com became facebook.com. We were adding new features. It was a profile picture and a name. We added photos. We added the ability to write on people's walls. We added groups. We added events. One of the other things that we did was add a messaging system. So you were able to message other people on the site. Most people don't remember this, but it was a web first, almost like an email client. It looked a little bit like Outlook. You could message your friend, add an attachment. You could include an image. And just around that time, this was like 2012, 2013, there was this huge shift to mobile. Like we were still building for college students who were at their computers all day. And the infamous story is Mark was like, guys, this trend is happening. We are behind. We don't even have a mobile app, a mobile experience. I'm not going to talk to anybody who doesn't bring in a prototype that's not, based on web. It has to be based on mobile. So the lore is that he like kicked people out of his room if they were coming in with like web prototypes and web mocks instead of mobile prototypes and mobile mocks. That just gives you a sense of like how we really had to pivot. It's like all of a sudden the mobile team that was like a small team that became the whole company became the mobile team. And one of the things that I was working on is how do we, all of a sudden everyone had like a phone in their pocket and was texting. And, I was using iMessage at the time, I think. And that was like really easy and simple. It was like one function, one icon on your home screen. You clicked on it, you texted someone. And because they also had a phone in their pocket, they responded immediately. Very different than email, which is like a 24-hour response time, adding a time, not adding attachments. I'm not trying to, include all kinds of rich media. I'm just saying, hey, you hear, and someone would respond. We had to take that product and make it a mobile first SMS-like mobile to mobile messaging system. So what we had sort of gone down this road of like something more interoperable across email, we had to now convert into this single use mobile to mobile, very responsive product. And that required a lockdown. We took the team, we went into a room, we were like, how can we completely reimagine this? And we built what was at the time we called Messenger 3.0. And so Messenger 1.0, Messenger 2.0 were really web focused. And here for the first time, we were building this app. We did face a really important challenge. It was a messaging system that was inside of the Facebook app. And like I mentioned, there's so many different features and functionality of the Facebook app. So if I go there, I have like 10 notifications, of which one is maybe a message response, and I wouldn't see it. There was just so much going on in the Facebook app. In order to have like a truly great mobile to mobile experience, we had to have a single use case there that we did really well. And that led to creating the Messenger app. And today we know this as Facebook Messenger. But the process of getting millions of people to download a separate app that was only focused on Messenger, talk about backlash. All of a sudden, everyone's messages on Facebook were in a different application. And we felt like this was really necessary in order to make it a great messaging system rather than, one of 10 things that you could do in a much more fully featured Facebook app. So during that time, I think there was a lot of user feedback. We don't want to download this new app. Why are my messages no longer here? Why are you fast app switching from Facebook to Messenger? And I would say though, with hindsight, that has really significantly increased the utility and adoption of Facebook messaging in general.
So that whole process sounds, to put yourself in the shoes of someone who is really, you're responsible for the strategy or responsible for executing the strategy. It sounds really intimidating, and it sounds like it could be quite scary in the moment. You obviously have the benefit of, looking back at this with time and perspective, but, where were you in your own leadership journey at that time, and what was it like for you? And, I think that helps other people understand when they feel like they're in the middle of a storm, right? What they can learn from that.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think one of the hardest things for me is oftentimes when you're trying to do a pivot, you also need to not just pivot the team, but sometimes you need to change the team. And so obviously that is very difficult. Like, the skill set that we might need for building a mobile messaging product might be different than the skill set we need for building a web-based email client. And And that part has always, sort of been hard. The other thing is, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, criticism is really, really, really important and good. And so obviously we want to listen to user feedback. I would sort of separate criticism into two buckets. Criticism that's sort of intended, and Mark has talked about this too, as someone I think who's been highly criticized, just gets a lot of feedback. We love feedback. But I think there's feedback given in good faith and feedback that's given sort of in bad faith. And it's really important to be able to isolate the feedback sort of given in good faith that, people are really trying to improve the product, highlight things that we're not seeing, contribute to the product development process, versus sort of maybe just people that just are not going to like it, no matter what. And so I think separating out like the signal, I think a little bit from the noise, what should we really respond to? How do we need to adapt and evolve based on feedback, is also just sort of a hard skill when it just seems like blanket criticism. But like we've done a lot of the hard things. I talked earlier about like launching newsfeed. I think if we were to take away newsfeed today, there might be protests outside because this is a feature that people really want. And similarly, I think, we have hundreds of millions of people using Facebook Messenger today. I think if we were to potentially, kill that app or move it back into the Facebook app, that would also be very upsetting.
Yeah, it's funny because as you were describing the revolt that you had from launching those features, newsfeed, I went back and I just Google searched and I found a TechCrunch article from it. And it's like, really, I mean, I missed this at the time, but like seeing that there was actually sites for boycotting this, and like you're right, it was really intense, this backlash, which is interesting. But I think if I try to parse out what you're saying about your lessons from, launching Messenger and then of course with newsfeed, is that anytime you are launching, and this is for all of us listening, anytime we're launching new features or new products, there's going to be feedback that comes in that's positive and that's negative, and it's about persevering through that and really knowing how to prioritize and categorize that input and use it. Is that right?
That was really beautifully said. Yes, prioritize and categorize the feedback. And yeah, no, thank you. I think one of the things that, and this may be a pivot, so let me know, but I think is really, really important is, as a product manager, I remember the early days of growth, we were like, what do we think people are going to want? And we like went in a room and just sort of brainstormed. And it was the throwing spaghetti at the wall period of my product management career. It was like, oh, this sounds fun, And we were at the time college students building a product for college students. So in some ways that worked. It's like, this is a feature I would like on Facebook. I'd like to be able to upload photo albums, and I'd like to be able to comment and like other people's photos. But as we've grown and, there's so many different people that use our products now, and we have many different products like we talked about. I remember the first time that like my grandma got on Facebook, it was like, she's a totally different person with a totally different, jobs to be hired. I think she's using our apps for many different reasons. It's really, really important that we look at how people are using our products and learn from that. And that's what I would call a data-driven, product-driven sort of development cycle. That's what I think our approach has been. And that is what I think has made us very successful. When I say data-driven, I don't just mean quantitative data. Yes, we should be like logging things. Everything's a funnel. How many people are coming in? How many people are coming out? What are they doing when they're on the website? But also qualitative data, like we talked about, looking at people's comments, having focus groups, doing user research. All of this is so important because sometimes I go around saying like, why guess when you can know? A lot of times the answers are already there. And another thing that I like to point out is when we do this understand process, when we look at the data, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. There are often times when products are taking off in certain countries or different communities or whatever demographics, and we can really look at how is that working? What are what are teens doing these days? Or what's happening with Line or Kakao Talk in some of the Asian countries? It is, it's just not evenly distributed. So there's a lot that we can learn from what we can see in terms of adoption and usage of our products, but also in the industry in general.
Absolutely. It's following down this path, and it's a bit of a step to the right. But one of the things that you and I have talked about is the sense of diversity and inclusion in building products. And especially for someone like Facebook, Meta, you have, right, 3 billion users around the world. Like that is that's building globally. And it's understanding your users globally. It's understanding your markets globally, but also locally. And it influences, if you do it right, it influences the way you build your product. It influences the problem spaces you choose to focus on, how you market them, everything, right? I know this is an area of shared passion. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about, what your recommendations are to people who want to learn from what you guys have done well, learn from things that you maybe have learned how to do better, right? Just talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah. And I think you're right. We build products for the diversity of 3 billion people. In order to do that well, our team needs to reflect the diversity of the people who are using our products. So that's why it's critical that, teams are diverse. One thing that I would say is one way that I think we sort of pioneered this like data-driven, product-driven product development cycle is that it's not just product managers or it's not just engineers. We have a very cross-functional, what we call circle of people that all contribute to building products. That includes PMs, engineers, but also designers, data analysts, local people in region. We have researchers. It takes a very cross-functional team to build something. I think there's sort of this misunderstanding or misconception that engineers are sort of just creating things. No, it's like a huge group of legal, policy, comms, cross-functional. And sometimes when I talk about being a PM, I talk about being the conductor of an orchestra. There's so many different musicians in your orchestra that are playing so many different instruments. And what you need to do is get them to play together sort of beautifully. And so that's one thing. The other thing that I think we have a lot of, that I'm particularly personally focused on, that I think we have and haven't done well so far, is just the community of women in product is, it's a small one. And I really want that to be bigger. We've had women who have been in our product program and they've gone on to actually be CEOs of other companies. And I actually think that's a great thing. I think that's great, actually, but I would also like our group of women at Meta to also be larger and also take, huge roles at Meta. I think the most important thing that we're doing in order to improve this is really just like getting out there. I mean, this is one reason that I'm doing this podcast. And you mentioned that you saw me talking at the Women in Product thing. I think it's really important to be involved in the women in product community. Also show that I'm the head of product. I'm a woman. I look pretty different than other, product managers just by the fact that I am a woman. I am not technical. I don't have a technical computer science engineering degree. And yet at the same time, I'm still able to run the product management function or be the leader of that function at Meta. And I think just these examples, like you, like me, are really important in showing other people, I think, that you can be in product and be a woman and be non-technical. You can
Absolutely
thrive, not just be.
Yeah, I think that's something, I mean, we could probably do a whole episode on, but I shared with you, I was meeting with a woman today who was actually trying to decide whether she should try to go after a product role. And her greatest hesitation was, despite having actually a phenomenal experience from a program management, thinking, well, I don't have the technical background, so am I qualified? And I think everyone who's listening needs to hear that's bullshit, excuse me, but like you can come into a product role. It's all about how you enter it and what the product role is, right? But not every product role needs to have a tech background at all. Yeah. And I think you and I are both examples of people who have come in without a product background and have gone on to lead product teams and product strategy. And so if you're hearing that today and it changes your focus, you can reach out to me. It sounds like you could reach out to Naomi, and you could talk with either of us about how that doesn't need to be a barrier. But I do think that it would be great for people to learn from you and your experience. So I know when we were prepping, at one point when you first came into Facebook, you were sitting on a floor with the marketing and the non-consumer scientists, and you had an ambition to get onto the other floor where Mark and, more of the the CS background and engineers were. Take us back to baby Naomi and her mindset. What was happening? How did you make the jump?
Great question. So at the time, Facebook was, the first Facebook office was actually 471 Emerson. It really was above this Chinese restaurant. It was everybody in one room. Mark was still coding. I was one of the few people not committing code on my computer. And then we moved right across the street to a larger office that was basically, instead of one room, it had 2 floors. On the top floor was sort of the business side of the house. It was people like me. I'd come in, I'd originally interviewed to be Sean Parker's personal assistant. And then I ended up working in marketing, finance, legal, policy, comms. These were the people on the top floor. And on the bottom floor was all of the engineers. And, I really wanted to be a product manager. I think I didn't even know what it was, but I wanted to move from the 3rd floor to the product floor because the 2nd floor, because that's how I felt I could just sort of be closer to building products. Like I was really excited about what they were doing. I knew I couldn't code myself. How can I be sort of like a conductor in the orchestra of people that are building these products? I want to be involved in that way. And so what I did was just every day go downstairs, take the stairs down and see if they were working on anything that I could be helpful with. One of the first projects that I worked on was actually helping to allow high school students on Meta. At the time, you had to have a .edu college email address. One of my first projects was, okay, how do we let high school students on this site? And I think a lot of really fundamental decisions were made. We decided not to create a separate site called Facebook High. We decided we're going to have one Facebook network. Everyone's going to be connected on that network, which at the time also wasn't a given. We could have had like Facebook College, Facebook High School, Facebook Germany, Facebook, teens, whatever. We decided, no, this is going to be one global network. Yes. And so I started helping out with that. And over time, I started helping out with other projects similar to, I mentioned, we were college students building a college site. We didn't have a new user experience. I just learned how to use Facebook by like looking at the person sitting next to me on their laptop. I worked on building a new user experience. Step 1, upload your profile picture. Step 2, connect with people that you know. These are things my grandma didn't intuitively know how to do when she joined Facebook. And I think that, just by virtue of adding value and helping out informally, I formally applied to be a product manager. And I remember the day that I actually got the job, I walked down with my box of all my stuff, like my laptop, my keyboard, my notebooks, and walked down to from the top floor to the bottom floor. And when I came down, Boz, who's actually our CTO, was leading the entire floor of engineers in a standing ovation. And I think that's really important because I started to cry. I mean, it was so amazing that it was an opportunity to, prove that PMs can add value. I think this also wasn't necessarily a given back in the day. I think sometimes you had engineers who were just like, what are you doing here? And why are you slowing me down? A lot of like, are you creating process? You don't have to code. What value are you adding? And also that I myself personally could contribute and add value as a product manager. And I think ever since then, we have, back then, I think it was one of the first product managers. Now we have almost 2,000 product managers at Meta, adding a ton of value. And I sort of have now taken the role of being able to be the spiritual guru for this function because I believe in it and care about it so much.
I love that. When you think back to those first projects before you formally applied, what were the skills, or what was the skill that was coming through from you at that time that was going to be a good sign that you would be a great product leader? Like, what can you objectively think about that?
Yeah. And I think that these are the same skills that I look for today when I'm hiring product managers, or like what I see in the best PMs. One is someone who wants to do sort of what's best for the company. I think a lot of times, we're in the position of having to negotiate between a lot of potentially like different teams, local incentives. We do a lot of the cross-functional work. And so your North Star really has to be doing what's best for Meta, best for the mission, best for the, the bigger picture. Second thing is simplifiers. I have noticed is a very rare skill among people. I think PMs have an opportunity to come into a really complex situation and break it down into a way that everybody can understand, not just some people can understand. Sometimes I'm not on the same page as an engineer really understands all of the details. In order to communicate across different functions and across different teams, we need to be able to communicate clearly and simply. And I think they need to, and this is something that I personally really care about. I think there's a lot of power in being willing to do whatever it takes. Sometimes we look down on, some of the execution work that we do, whether that's project management, program management, like setting up meetings, following up on tasks. Like, in contrast, I think there's a lot of power and leverage in being able to do that. Execution really matters. Earlier, you talked about strategy. I believe in perfect execution, because if you don't perfectly execute on the strategy, you don't know if it was right or wrong. PMs are responsible for perfect execution. And sometimes that means like you're doing some of the busy work. You're making the PowerPoint decks. You are like scheduling the meetings. You are like, chasing down tasks. And I know that sometimes that doesn't seem like the big, broader, visionary product strategy work. I would say it's equally important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I often tell people that if there was an emoji for a product manager, and it's certainly true for me, it's an octopus, because you're managing so many things at once, and and it's all your responsibility. It's all your responsibility. So I think that's really good advice for anyone who feels like, oh gosh, this isn't what I thought I was doing. Actually, it is. And you're right. It's a great way to think about it. Like, you are responsible for execution. And if you don't do it well, then how can you say from a data-driven perspective, one way or another, whether the strategy was right? So yeah, I think that's a great counter for anyone who catches themselves on a end of day Friday thinking, oh, why am I doing this PowerPoint? Well, that's because it's part of your job. So yeah. Yeah. Great. Okay, cool. Well, I think that gives people a lot of clarity, hopefully, around kind of some of the skills that have been helpful for you, but also why it shouldn't be a blocker if you don't have technology as your background, but you do have 1, 2, 3 of those things that you've just listed off, right? Yes. And a good indicator. Okay. Okay, fantastic.
Sorry, the one other thing that I would say, we talked about being a simplifier. We talked about being willing to, attitude, being willing to do whatever it takes, including execution. We talked about wanting, being oriented on what's best for the company. Another thing that I have seen is low ego. To your point about having to work with a lot of different people and a lot of different teams. You work with a whole cast of characters. Some people are easy, some people are difficult, some people are, I think being the conductor of an orchestra is really, really tough. And the one analogy that I would say with the conductor is, you're not the star of the show. It's not about you as the product manager. I think sometimes people see, I want to be the PM so I can be the face of everything, so I can be like the CEO. You are successful if your team is successful. And when I call that is like the orchestra is playing beautiful music, that's when you're successful, not if like the spotlight's on you.
Yeah, and I think it's another thing it does is it goes even wider than the team, because you're right in terms of the success, but it's also the idea of stakeholder management and how important it is to manage all the stakeholders and understanding what success is and keeping them involved. And we all know that stakeholder management can be incredibly challenging. Yeah. Any lessons that you wish you would have known earlier regarding either the concept of it's not about you, it's about the team, or stakeholder management, things that if only you had known this, 5 years, 10 years ago, you would have been more effective?
Yes, the biggest lesson I think I learned is, um, this happened when I made the transition from an individual contributor to a manager, is that like if I really zoomed out and asked myself what is the most leveraged, most impactful thing that I can do to help the company, it's not by doing everything myself. That is capped. There's a ceiling there. I'm just one person. For 7 years, I was the only PM on growth. And when I talk about growth, what I'm talking about is sort of removing barriers that are preventing people from joining. I talked about, allowing high school students, and then we allowed like anyone with any email address, like my grandma. We've worked on projects like translating the site into different languages so people who don't speak English can use Meta. Not everyone has like an iPhone. Sometimes people are using like, lower end devices, feature phones. I used to have like a flip phone. They're not always on like high speed internet. How do we develop experiences for those people? Sometimes people can't afford a data plan. How do we make access to Facebook free? These are the kinds of things that I was thinking about as the only PM on growth. That's a lot of stuff to think about. And I thought that sort of job security, and it came from me being like a single point of failure almost. I think in some ways I was probably being a bit territorial about like, I get to product manage that and I'm the only growth PM. Like I said, now we have 2,000 PMs working at Meta. And it really took me time to realize actually the best thing that I can do to help growth, the best thing that I can do to help the company is build an incredible team of people. And there might actually be someone who can work on various aspects of this, like the experience on feature phones way better than I, and let's hire a person who, lives in India that, uses feature phones every day and can see the pain points that people are having around using it. And so it took me a while to really accept and realize that the I needed to, in order to scale, I really needed to hire like an amazing team. And that was the best way that I can contribute a lot. These days, a lot of the work that I do is really managing managers who are, and so much about my work now is really about making them successful. Obviously, I still have a few projects that I'm very deeply involved in, but um, I'm I'm finding that, the leaders that I have in place, helping them with the like 5% of things that they need help with is really the most important thing that I can do rather than doing 100% myself.
Yeah, I think there's two really poignant things there. One is something you're saying it in a different way, but a former guest, a recent guest who came on, Vibor from Shopify, he called out how important and how often people, leaders in particular, don't realize that by not hiring faster, smarter people under you, how detrimental it is to your own success, but more importantly to the growth of the business, right? And so it's something that I think really resonated. We heard from a lot of listeners like, yes, gosh, I wish I would have learned that sooner. So there's that. And then there's something that I've always thought is a really simple metaphor for what you're saying about your job as a manager and as a leader. And it's that you can be the greatest firefighter in the world, but you're never going to fight as many fires as if you create, 10 more great firefighters who create 10 more great firefighters, right? Like that's going to have much more impact than you with your big hose, right? So, yeah.
Exactly. I love that metaphor. And I also feel lucky that, to your point about it's the best thing you can do for the business, but also the best thing that you can do for your career. We actively try to recognize people that, contribute by making other people better. You shouldn't have to like that should be a value that we have, that we recognize managers for, is like how strong their teams are.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Well, we're getting to that point in the show where I get to ask one of my favorite questions, although
Okay.
all of the questions today have been great. But my question is to you about if there was a museum that was dedicated to the world's most important products, not the most successful, the most important products, what do you think should be in that museum and why?
Well, there are two things that I'm really passionate about, personally. The first is animals. We were talking about our dogs earlier, but I really care about the treatment and of animals. And I feel like something that we'll potentially look back on in in a few decades is just sort of how animals are treated in terms of the food industrial complex. And one thing that I'm really excited about is not just replacing animal meat with plant-based meat that tastes like, a hamburger. I think I was sort of early in the conversation around Beyond and Impossible Burger when it really actually seemed impossible. It's like, who is going to eat this? And now it's at, Burger King and McDonald's. We always have plant-based options, which I think is really great. There are some people that should continue to eat meat. I eat meat as well. And I don't want to eat plant-based meat that's sort of moonlighting as meat. And so one thing I'm excited about for those people who want to continue eating real meat is what we're calling synthetic meat, which is just meat that is grown in a petri dish with stem cells from animals, but no animal has been harmed in the treatment, in the creation of this meat. And a friend of mine is now working at a company that is really focused on how can we make chicken breasts in petri dishes. And it just takes a small starter of stem cells from chicken in order to generate this. Obviously, I think this is, 10 to 15 to 20 years away to get to a place where it really satisfies the needs of people and it gets to a cost that is affordable. I think right now it's very expensive to create a steak in a petri dish, but I think like most technology trends, this will become cheaper and easier and more accessible over time. The other thing that I am also really grateful for and that I think has had huge impact on me personally and more broadly as well is fertility treatments. I think in the future, much like with synthetic meat, it will be a lot more cost effective for women who want to be able to freeze their eggs. This is a perk or a benefit that we offer at Meta. And I just think it's really awesome to be able to have more choice and optionality around when you want to have a family and not be so worried about sort of the time and the biological clock. I think there's just a lot of empowerment for women in being able to have that kind of control and options around having children. And so I think that I hope more people will have access to that option as well over time.
Yeah. I remember Melinda Gates's Moment of Lift. That was a great book for lots and lots of reasons, but it really, really, even as a woman who was making my own choices on whether or when to have children, it really hit home to me how big of an impact you would have if you just give women the ability to choose when they want to have those children. And that's obviously partially birth control, but it's also partially fertility planning, right?
Yes, birth control and fertility planning has been life-changing, right?
That's right. Well, Naomi, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you for sharing your story with us. And we look forward to watching both you and Meta continue to shine.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the podcast, guys. Be sure to share the word of product-led growth far and wide and let your colleagues, friends, family, neighbors, and anyone you think who would like to know that there's a kick-ass product podcast on offer from the Product-Led Alliance. If you haven't already, don't forget to sign up to the Slack community and check out all our other great content, upcoming events, and other ways to get involved at productledalliance.com. And let's come back again next time to talk more about the head, the heart of product.